You're all very welcome. 3 minutes now. Deputy Michael McGrath, please.
Thank you very much, Ceann Comhairle. Minister, I don't think the Government should underestimate the level of public anger at the spectacular cost overrun in the development of the National Children's Hospital. We learned today from the Irish Times that senior officials from the HSE and the Department of Health discussed potential cost overruns almost a year before the date Minister Harris says he was informed of rising costs in August 2018. And Minister, the bottom line here is what we need to know is where was the political oversight of this project? This is the Government's flagship capital project, the largest ever project in the history of the Department of Health and the HSE. And are we really being asked to believe that Minister Simon Harris was not kept informed that costs were rising and rising dramatically? What information was flowing to the Minister in relation to this project between the autumn of 2017 and the autumn of 2018, when he acknowledges that he did learn of the issue? And if he didn't know, why didn't he ask? Why was he not insisting on regular updates from his own officials who were directly involved in the process? We are told that Minister Harris became aware of the significance of the issue, if not the final figure, in late August 2018. And yet this information was not passed to the Minister for Finance until the 9th of November 2018. And this is a scenario, Minister, that I just cannot get my head around. We had the Minister for Finance, the person in charge of the purse strings of this state, who, as part of a collective cabinet decision, signed off in April of 2017 on a project at a cost of €983 million. And we were being led to believe that the next he heard of any change was in November 2018, over a year and a half later, when he was given the news that the direct build cost of this hospital had increased by €450 million, and on top of the other costs involved, bringing the overall bill to €1.7 billion. And this begs the obvious question: what supervision did Minister Donoghue have and his Department of Public Expenditure over this massive capital project? And of course, in the meantime, Minister, a budget was being negotiated between September and mid-October. Expenditure allocations for 2019 were agreed and published on budget day. Allocations for current spending and indeed for capital spending, without this massive overrun being factored in, despite at least one Cabinet Minister being aware of the massive overrun. Throughout September and indeed early October, there was intense engagement between officials from the Department of Health and the Department of Public Expenditure, and indeed directly between the two ministers, Harris and Donoghue, as well. Not only were they discussing the budget for the Department of Health for 2019, both current and capital, but they were discussing the massive overrun on the current side in the Department of Health in 2018, which, as we know, ended up at €655 million. I cannot envisage a scenario, Minister, where in any company in this country, a senior manager in charge of a capital project and becoming aware of a massive overrun would not inform the finance director of that company. What we need to know, Minister, is what are the consequences for other projects. This will go far beyond some projects being delayed by a few weeks and a few months. The €100 million that has to be found this year is only the beginning. Multiples of that will have to be found over the next 4 years. So can you inform the House of those consequences, and when will we know the facts? And what is being done to reduce the cost of this project now? And very finally, what does this say about the competence and the capacity of this government to deliver on other major capital projects, not least the National Broadband Plan that 500,000 homes and businesses are waiting for throughout this country?
Minister.
Thank you, Ceann Comhairle, and thank you, Deputy, for the question. This hospital will be delivered, and it is being built at the moment. The Children's Hospital is an incredibly important project for this country, as we all know. And it is going to stand the test of time in terms of the families and the children that it is going to help up and down the country. Yesterday, the Taoiseach spoke to the many benefits it will bring in terms of the services and the emergency services that it will provide. I think we all agree that it is an important project and it must be delivered. Of course, people are angry with what they have heard now about the inflation in the costs for the delivery of this project. The additional €319 million in capital costs that are going into this project since the original outline was provided for Phase 2 in 2017. The government is angry too, and that is why we're taking action to get to the bottom of this problem. In December of last year, in December of last year, an important decision was brought to Cabinet on the future of this project. And essentially, three options were there. One was to pause the project, even further delay to a project that's been discussed for decades, but which this government is now implementing. The second option was to go out and potentially re-tender the project. Again, more delay and an even greater cost. And the third option was to proceed with this project, pursue this hospital. That was the right decision to make. And if other people would have taken a different decision and put the future of this hospital in jeopardy, I'd like to hear that. We believe it was the right decision to proceed with this hospital, to bring about the many benefits that it will deliver, and will deliver for the next 100 years in this country. Now that we are proceeding with the hospital, and we have the size of the cost overrun in front of us, what we need to establish and get to the bottom of is, how did this occur? Was it avoidable? Was there negligence? How do we prevent it from happening again? And can we make cost savings now? And that's the process that is underway, with the work that the PwC will do. The terms of reference have now been published, and we have to get into the process. But alongside that, we have both departments, Public Expenditure and Reform, as well as the Department of Health, appearing in committees last week. Minister Pascal Donoghue was in committee yesterday. Minister Harris is in committee today. The Taoiseach has taken questions on this. The chairperson of the board, to protect the integrity of the process, has resigned and been replaced. And now we proceed with the PW process to get answers to those questions that are very important. But let me tell you, Deputy, we are committed to delivering this hospital because it is so important for families and children up and down the country. We want to get to the bottom of exactly what happened here in relation to how these costs inflated over time, who knew what when, and then what happens as a result of that. And if you look at the terms of reference for the PwC report and the work that they will do now between now and the end of March, it will bring us back those answers and those details, and then we can make decisions as to what happens then. And in relation to, we know a lot of the costs and what has happened there. What we need to understand is why, and on the admittance of some of the people involved in the project, why some of the early warning systems did not work. But these are the questions that need to be answered, so we can then have a detailed discussion on where we go from here. Thank you.
Can I just, before we proceed, bring it to people's attention that the people who elected you and me are sitting at home in their homes watching this carry on. Now, the issue is of enormous importance, but they would, I think, expect to see us conduct our debates in an appropriate and effective manner. Will you please stop heckling the Minister? And if there is continued heckling, I'll be forced to suspend the House. We ask a question, at least allow it to be answered. And please stick to the times allocated. Deputy McGrath, please.
Yeah, Minister, you haven't dealt with the elephant in the room, which is the lack of any political oversight over the single largest capital project in the history of the Department of Health and the HSE. Why is it that officials representing Minister Harris knew for up to a year that the cost of this project was spiralling through the roof before it was even brought to his attention, or so we are led to believe? Why is it that Minister Harris himself, on learning that this was a major issue in late August 2018, allowed a budget to be brought into this House and prepared against a backdrop of not knowing that this was going to manifest itself by way of hundreds of millions of euro of an overrun? We have a Minister for Finance and Public Expenditure who was represented on the board, but who too happened not to be told. Minister Harris says his officials told the officials in the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform in October, and yet the Minister was not told. Does anyone talk to anyone in this government, Minister? This is all over the place, and meanwhile there is no certainty that these costs associated with this project are not going to climb further and further. So what reassurance can you give to the House and to the Irish people that the costs are going to be reined in, that efforts will be made to reduce the cost of delivering this project?
Thank you,
and when will we have clarity on what the consequences are for other projects in health, in education, in transport, projects right throughout this country that are depending on capital funding? When will we have that clarity?
Minister.
Thank you. Follow-on question. The political oversight here is clear, and it's not correct to say that officials knew that costs were spiralling out of control for a year before this. The issue of the costs in 2017, that increase in costs of around 60 to 62 million, is a separate issue to what we're dealing with here. So we need to be very clear that we separate these issues so we can actually understand what has happened here in relation to the decision that the Cabinet had to take in December of last year. As soon as Minister Harris was informed, towards the end of August, beginning of September, that there was the potential for significant overrun here, looking back at what had been an outline in 2017, intensive work was then done while the GMP process was happening to crystallise what those costs might be before the process actually came to an end. And when that information was understood at the beginning of November, it was informed to Minister Harris. He immediately informed and made sure that the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform was informed then. And then from the period from there until December, when the Cabinet made a decision, work had to be done to make sure that we knew exactly what had happened in terms of the scale of the costs, how that would be managed in terms of future budgets, and the decision that the Cabinet will be brought to the Cabinet in December as to where we should go from there. And that decision was taken to proceed with the hospital and then have an intensive investigation into how this happened. That began in January in committee. It continues today with the Minister in front of the committee. We will have the PwC report that will get those answers, and we will work with that report, with those answers, and then take further decisions based on what that brings us.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy